Here.
Pam Hopday,
Here.
Brian Wright, Richard Palante, Jeffrey Manosco,
Special districts must be
Rolf
all over
Godon.
Hawaii.
Yes, you're here. Lisa Wallace, and Lindsay Roman.
And Lindsay is on her way, going to be late.
Okay.
And our consultant team just arrived. I'm going to give them a few minutes to, but we will, they're in traffic, I think. Yes.
267 is lovely.
Yes.
Traffic today?
Yeah, oh, it's bad.
We don't have traffic.
No, never. Not sure what you're talking about. Thank you. So I'm going to open for public comment for anything not on tonight's agenda. If you'd like to address the committee, please state your name for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Hey folks. My name's Laura Shaywin. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the Washoe people, indigenous custodians of the occupied land known as Truckee that we meet on today. Truckee and the surrounding area of Da'o'aga is the ancestral and spiritual home to the Washoe, who have stewarded these lands for thousands of years and since the beginning of time. Our town, Truckee, and the surrounding area have been ancestral, trade, meeting, hunting, and harvesting grounds for the Washoe, Martis, Maidu, Miwok, Paiute, Shoshone, and many other indigenous peoples for centuries before us. We recognize the descendants of these tribes and others who continue to share, steward, live, and work on this land with us. The Washoe have always been part of the land and environment and believe that land, language, and people are intrinsically intertwined. The Washoe have safeguarded these lands since the beginning of time. The earth, its terrain, its waters, all living and non-living things are sacred. And they request that you assist in preserving this ecosystem for future generations. We pay respect to the Washoe elders, past, present, and emerging, and we extend that respect to all Indigenous Native American peoples here today. Thanks.
Any other public comment? Seeing none, I will close public comment. And we'll move into the consent calendar. We have 2 items, the minutes of September 3rd, which I think we just never got around to approving by this committee, and the minutes of December 3rd. Would any member like to pull an item from consent? Staff? Public? Seeing none, I would call for a motion.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Consent calendar carries. Presentation, staff updates.
One staff update. The town received a grant a few months ago to complete a downtown rail yard pedestrian crossing feasibility study, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but essentially what we're doing is sort of an initial study to look at options for providing an additional pedestrian crossing over, under, or at grade across the railroad tracks from essentially along West River Street or in the downtown area. So this is sort of the first step is a high-level study to see if there are options that could be feasible. So as part of that project, we are convening a community review committee, which will be a sort of ad hoc committee to provide input throughout that study. Council has directed staff to pull together representatives from a bunch of different sort of perspectives and organizations, including the Historical Society, the Chamber, Downtown Merchants Association, the Railroad Society, Truckee Trails Foundation, MAP, Truckee North Tahoe Transportation Management Association, 2 members at large, the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, and River Revitalization Steering Committee. So we are looking for one representative from R2SC. We do already have a couple R2SC members who are wearing other hats on that committee, I think including Jessica and Corey, who are both representing their organizations. This is a sort of staff-appointed ad hoc committee, so what a request tonight is if you are not already on that committee and are interested in being on it, please talk to one of us right after the meeting tonight or email Carissa by Friday morning so we know who is interested, and then we will select a committee member or an R2SC member to be part of that ad hoc committee. The commitment is anticipated to be 3 to 5 meetings over the next 6-ish months. Tentative first meeting, January 29th or 30th. Any questions on that?
They had a committee I was on that studied the intersections
The
there.
Bridge Street.
Bridge Street, and we actually did study crossings as well. So I don't know if any people from that committee would be valuable or not. I'd be happy to continue working on that if you wanted to add me in.
Yeah, just send either email or now we put you on the list, just so.
Okay, yeah, I saw that, but I just
Yeah.
thought you should know there was a
Yeah.
committee before that did that.
And Dan Wilkins is leading this with Alfred, so.
Great.
He'll have that knowledge.
Great.
All right, that's it for staff updates.
Any public comment on that item? Seeing none, move on to our discussion items. Pam, we have the action team subcommittee update.
Yes. Well, we have been hard at work. We have had, we will have had 8 interviews, hopefully by the end of the week, is our goal. And I just want to give you a little bit of background. The people who are the applicants for our Catalyst projects are Bill Kenny and Nancy Costello, Alicia and Andy Barr, Jan Holland, Greg Henriksen, Mark Tanner, Yvette Durant, and Jeff Bender. And Judge Durant and Jeff Bender submitted 2 applications out of their 5 properties on West River. That's where the 9 applicants are and the 8 interviews. Jeff Manasco has been very ill. He's feeling much better. We all saw him today, so we were so happy to see him. There were 3 people that were selected from our subcommittee to interview. They were myself, Jeff, and Jake, and Jason Tube, Jake Hudson. And Jason Tubes volunteered to fill in if Jeff could not attend. And so Jason has joined our mighty Musketeer team. And Carissa is with us on all of these interviews that we so appreciate, all of your help and work. If you will remember, we have, our subcommittee spent a lot of time putting questions together. And we are using those questions from the subcommittee, all 7 of them, for our interviews. And those questions are working really, really well. And I think the most important thing for all of us is that building trust with the property owners right at the beginning and throughout, and making sure everyone feels valued. And we have a ranking system, and I must say, we've interviewed Bill Kenny and Nancy Costello, Andy and Alicia, Jan and Greg. 3 of these applicants are here tonight, and I just want to thank each of you for your time. And everyone came prepared. Tim joined Greg today, and I so appreciated that. But not only prepared, but just ready to collaborate. Really interested. And it's just been great. I would give the process so far a 10. I'm just hoping all of them will as well. I don't know if any of them want to say anything. But our next steps are we will reconvene as interviewers with Jeff being outside ears, and really go over all of the data and the metrics and make a recommendation as to, within ourselves, what our 3 catalyst projects would be. And what our aha has been is that every single project has some merit. And there may be things that we can do, and Stephanie, we talked about this, with many of these projects that may not be the cutting edge that will lead the way, but there are little things that are actually big things that we can do together to help move their dreams and visions forward. So I'm not projecting that that's what's gonna happen, but I want you to be prepared. Then we'll meet with our subcommittee, the Economic Vitality Action Team, and go through our reasoning for our recommendations to that team. I know that's going to be a productive meeting, and we've invited all the applicants to attend that meeting so that they can hear our deliberations, and it's very, forthright and transparent. And then on the 28th of January, that presentation of our recommendations for those catalyst projects will be given to the town council. So those are our next steps.
That's wonderful.
Can I add just one piece?
Yes.
You mentioned that Jake is on the interview panel. Just wanted to point out that Jake is from the River Health and Access Action Team. So I want to
Right.
make sure that part of the interview panel included the perspective of that action team as well.
I missed this part, sorry. Are all the interviews completed? You've heard from all the
No,
projects?
we have not.
Okay.
We have just interviewed 4 people, so we have 4 more interviews.
Okay.
Could you give us those other 4 names again?
Yes, so, Greg Hendrickson, that's
Mhm.
now, Mark Tanner, Yvette Durant and Jeff, Al and Carla Pombo, and Jack Guzman. So great group.
Yeah.
It's an impressive timeline you guys are doing too. Like, it's nice to see things not being dragged out.
Good.
So kudos to the team for putting in the time.
Sorry. So the Pombos did apply?
Yes.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I mean, it's been like I always go, that's a really impressive timeline that you guys are hitting it. There's clearly a lot of really committed people on that committee. I mean, just this interview process, from what I saw on my side of the table, I was like, wow, times 8 or 9 or whatever. That's, of course, and then the deliberation, the preparation, the going through the notes, all that. It's a lot of time. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I know you said this, Pam, so I just want to underline it for the applicants who haven't been interviewed yet.
Mhm.
Like, you've said very clearly, and we all understand, the process is still underway.
Yes,
The process is still underway.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And Pam, is it, maybe I missed a step. You're moving fast for me, but.
Okay, sorry.
Will this committee know who you are recommending to the council prior to doing that?
Carissa?
We don't have another meeting.
Right.
Again, the quick timeline. We don't have another R2SC. It would have pushed us back too far. And so we're not formally announcing to this.
In thinking about our discussion at our last full meeting, there are so many conflicted people on this committee that know. I think the recommendation was, Joan, that no, we would not notify this committee, that they would hear the night that we presented to town council.
We discussed that explicitly at our
Right.
last steering committee meeting, that
Yes.
this was the way
It was gonna play out.
Right.
It needed to go.
And, yeah.
Yes, I
But,
didn't think I was crazy.
I
thought I remembered all of
At least
that.
not for that, right?
Your
At least not for that.
deliberation meeting, the action team deliberation meeting is open
Yes.
to the
Yes.
public and to,
Yes.
so any committee members, if you wanted to hear or you wanted to know what's going on,
Yes.
that would be the meeting to go to. And that is on the
We
Oh,
don't
you don't know
know
yet.
when that.
Town council's the 28th.
Oh, 28th is
Yes,
the.
Yeah.
we were going to meet on the 16th, but one of our members has a medical issue.
Okay.
And so Chris is working on rescheduling that.
Okay.
Hoping for the 17th, we don't know.
Okay.
The town council.
So I would just appreciate, I guess, is when that meeting
Yes,
is
scheduled.
scheduled, please
Mhm.
notify the entire RTC.
Absolutely.
That would be helpful. Thanks.
Before the recommendation goes to council on the 28th, we will be publishing a staff report, as we always do. So we'll share that out, that'll be published on the 23rd. So that'll have detailed information and sort of walk through the process and the rationale as well.
And just for you all to know, in bringing Jason on board, Jake Hudson and I met with Jason, the three of us, for 3 hours and 45 minutes Sunday morning. And we went through all the questions, we assigned the questions, we role-played. We then went to every single property and walked every property, so it was fresh in our mind with the applications, so that we would know exactly what people had applied for. So we wanted to be overly prepared, and I'm really happy we did that. It made a big difference in the interviews today.
Great, thank you for your committee's
Good
work
work.
and your work.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Amazing.
Any public comment?
Yes. I was in the meeting today, and it was wonderful and efficient and all of that stuff, and I hope that we do something. There's stumbling blocks on both sides. There's stumbling blocks on my side, and there's stumbling blocks on their side as to how much cooperation we'll get going down the road, but it was well done, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, Stephanie.
I still think I have a clicker, so Madison's gonna read my mind. So the bulk of our meeting today, we wanted to carry on the conversation that we had before the holidays, which saw us reflecting back on some of the items in terms of, what do uses potentially look like, specifically around West River Street. So again, today we're gonna focus the conversation around West River Street. I'll go through first a few slides that, again, summarize some of the conversations. We looked at a number of different projects and ideas. We had heard about the Rhino project in Denver, and some of the wins that we might be able to think about for this area. So there are a few slides that are added. I think my email is probably too big to that will slide into your package that you see today. But this is a summary again of the feedback that we've heard to date. Through all the different exercises and conversations that we've had, there is a lot of common narrative around the idea of wanting to have flexibility, but we want some structure in terms of and what development might look like, and new development might look like along West River. The potential to look at sub-districts north and south of West River, that less focus on, again, that ability, but with some kind of, so we want to encourage innovation, creating a new neighborhood, again, is some of the, and again, thinking about uses that complement downtown. Some of the ideas and language that have come up are maker spaces, small-scale artistic spaces. We've also heard that there's a need to, is there a question about minimizing uses that require outdoor space storage, but then also, I think this is one of those sticky issues of, or do we allow some outdoor storage and then have performance standards? In our last meeting, we had seen some examples where maybe there's some ability to screen up front and have some, front-facing uses that are more aesthetic and more in line with sort of the vision of this area, but then allowing some outdoor spaces for outdoor storage. The need to accommodate some essential services, or where do they go? And then, just acknowledging again that relocation, if there is relocation for businesses who are interested in that does require some monetary incentive. So next slide. The takeaways from the conversation that we had in the last meeting of, looking at a variety of different types of projects and those elements that the committee said, yeah, that resonates with what makes sense for this area. We heard a lot of sort of ideas about, cultural center or cultural district, like those ideas and that language came up. The idea to lead with art, creativity, authenticity. mural is that idea of don't erase it, don't erase the history of this place, but lean into it a little bit more. We'll also say we didn't focus, as we think about leading out, that brings to mind, also we've, throughout this process, talked about leading with restoration as well, the river health piece, so I just want to make sure that we don't lose that, even though we are focused about the uses here, that, the river health piece is a big part of this area as well. There was a lot of resonance about repurposing buildings and integrating new with existing, so again, this idea of not just wholesale replacement and trying to start from scratch, but integrating again new with existing. Indoor outdoor spaces, some that have some kind of industrial feel, again that idea of the erased history. There's resonance with that word grit. Having flex spaces, again multifamily housing, a variety of housing came up. Layering buildings, both for variety and scale, but then also to screen as well, that as an opportunity, especially if you need some density to make some projects work. And then discussion about wanting to incorporate some kind of neighborhood services as well. Like that goes back to that sort of idea of a new neighborhood, but a neighborhood that again mixes new with existing as some housing, but also some of the uses that you see there today. So next slide. What we heard again, integrating essential service uses, that maybe there's some small scale artisan creative uses, maybe some welding, glazier, but allowing some limited outdoor storage, but again, screening those. So that's the example in the lower right from Reno with outdoor living. And then also the question came up about pickleball, so I wanted to capture that here because that was a new discussion that we talked about, but maybe that's a reuse of some of the buildings in the future as well. So those are some of the ideas that come up. So as we look forward in terms of trying to create a cohesive narrative about what that means so that the town can do some work about thinking about what does flexibility with some structure look like in terms of the how does this actually come together? One of the tools to help do that is to use place types, and you see this in the general plan with the description about what is the West River District, the goal for the area, looking at some of the place type characters that other communities of similar scale have used. The idea of a maker district or a cultural district could come up. So our first exercise that we wanted to talk through tonight was really looking at what are the words, the language that we use to describe this West River District. So this is the description in the West River District description for the 2040 general plan. Live, work, recreate, and this slide is not in your packet. This is one of the extras. But I thought it was important because there has been some description that has come about for this area, and the language that continues to be discussed in these meetings about live, work, recreate, provide public access to the Truckee River, allowing a mix of river-oriented uses that highlight the Truckee River, and on the right you can see the variety of uses that have been identified that support that. Supporting a four-season economy, again, that sort of connotes that there is some kind of use and economic generation use. Residential type comes up again, that provides housing for workforce, that there's retail, lodging, and service uses, that we want to enhance the physical and visual access to the restored Truckee River, and that there's safe routes for non-automotive modes of transportation, so walking, biking. So on the next slide, and this is in your packet, again, sort of coalescing a lot of the language and the discussions that we've had throughout the year, and also pulling together some of that language from the 2040 general plan. This is just a first pass at what we've heard throughout the year, and would like to get feedback today on what out of this makes sense to carry forward, and or if there's things that might want to be revised, or if the 2040 general plan just fits it, and we want to move forward with that as the description for the place and what this place is. So the description here is that it's a live-work neighborhood. Again, this idea of neighborhood has come up a number of times. That it has managed access to a healthy Truckee River, but it's a place where housing and workplaces are located in close proximity to each other, so there's an integration of existing and new, that it provides residents with convenient access to employment and neighborhood services, that there's adaptive reuse of older buildings, great public spaces, a large mix of uses. There's some higher density residential that's brought into the sites that mixes old structures with uses and uses with the new uses, that it integrates ample landscaping, pedestrian connectivity, and that service and light manufacturing facilities that are non-noxious, that there's no hazardous materials or pollution, non-nuisance, no odors, excessive light or heavy traffic, that those are also present. And then a list of, predominant uses, that it's predominantly multifamily, residential, townhomes, that there's residential above other compatible ground floor uses. There's also small artisanal spaces. Examples of those are bakeries, breweries, woodworking, low impact production, neighborhood commercial, office, service, and that there's also some limited uses of, auto service repair, boutique lodging, small scale contractor offices with, screening of snow yard, just as a starting point for discussion. But I'd like to spend like 20, 30 minutes tonight sort of thinking about these elements and seeing, what parts of the description do you like, and then what parts you would change as we think about those elements of, what is this place? So if you go to the next two slides, just stop there. And thoughts, we have the description, if you go one more slide, sort of broken out. And then on the slide that you have, it has the two color blocks, the green and the blue. That's the place description, but it's up on the screen, a little bit more broken out, just so it's for you as well. But I'll just start there. Things that, John?
I didn't mean to cut you off.
Things that you like about the description, that you feel like out of the conversations that we've had that carry through, that you're like, yes, that's what we've been saying, that makes sense.
I think it's really well written, and there's very little that I would change. There's a couple things that come to mind. On the bigger picture, I think it's important for us to understand, particularly in downtown, ideally, we're mixing visitors and residential, right? I mean, I think we're a little confused as a community, whether we're a locals community or a visitors community, but I think we just need to be honest that downtown, we're both. And so I think, I would just love a little bit more of a nod that it's a great place to visit and it's a great place to live. So that's kind of on the macro side. Very specifically, I can see the desire to be more specific in parentheses about noxious activities or non-nuisance activities, but I feel like those are both very specific, and I mean, our co-work space generates hazardous materials and pollution, for example, right? I mean, hazardous materials are, that's just a really broad category. So if a maker is using lacquer or something like that, or paint or something, that's a hazardous material. So I just would be less specific, probably in both of those parentheses. No odors. I mean, I don't know. People tell me I stink. I think it's just a little bit.
Yeah, I think where we're going, because that is still like a sticky issue, right? In terms of mixing residences and living spaces with, spaces that don't really mix with residential areas. So that's where that came from, but maybe there's a different way to hit that. Because I do want to honor that there are issues with having people live next to places that, they'll complain about and that they shouldn't be living next to, essentially.
Coffee roasters are, to your point, very odorous when they roast. But is that?
Some smell better than others.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a problem.
You can probably
Could ask the people that live across the
smell
street.
dark horse for that.
There's like 4 or 5 in town.
Yeah.
You can go all over town and you're gonna hit.
Well, then
run
is that
into-
considered manufacturing?
Well, I don't know.
That's,
Is that light manufacturing? I would think it is, but.
about printing T-shirts, is that manufacturing?
And maybe before we get into like the very fine detail, of, like, is this, or is that, like, thoughts about how we may address that piece of, I think, wanting to have some of these uses that might at times have some odors, but that we want to add residential. while still
I
having
like
acre space.
that it's
Is
included, recognizing, actually, in every single one of these paragraphs, we could do the yes but in every single one of the paragraphs. I like that it's included here, and, acknowledging, the devil's in the details, right? It's tough to work it out, but I just as one committee member support that it's included in the
What's
place
included?
type
Including the piece
description.
in the parentheses.
I would suggest, I mean, again,
I'm
like,
just-
I don't
I'm
know if
just
this
saying
is the
it's-
place to wordsmith, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's appropriate to acknowledge it for people who are gonna object to service and light manufacturing facilities. The fact that you've acknowledged it in parentheses, that's gonna help.
I just wanna say that it's not that I don't think it's worth being more specific, I'm just saying that, no hazardous materials. I think the Watershed Council would, for example, would find it difficult to do its job without any hazardous materials, for example.
So it might be too
Yeah,
limiting.
I think it's just,
It might be too limiting as written, but
absolutely.
okay if we try and
It
figure out
should
how
be
we
such
still
as
put some,
instead of
some
no.
elements.
Such as.
Jessica, what do you
Like,
think?
this is so much wordsmithing,
Yeah, I
but
know.
like, instead of it saying no, like such as hazardous materials or pollution, you're not putting it so like direct as that, but
Yeah,
again, that's like very minute
Yeah,
in the
I guess-
detail.
it might be, you perhaps, right, I'm contradicting myself. Perhaps that language could be stricken when this eventually gets really published, because honestly, permitting and regulation
We'll take care of
will
that.
take care
gonna
of
take
that.
care of that.
Right, that's kind of,
Yeah.
They
Well,
will definitely
I think we would hope that they would, but they haven't in the past. I mean, if you look at the Pioneer Center, we insisted that housing be above the industrial, and it's really not compatible. People living there are very unhappy with the noise, the sound, the trucks, the danger to their children. It isn't compatible, so I think, for me, the compatibility with housing is very important.
That's a good point.
Especially when you say you can screen outdoor storage and such. You look there, they have screening, but you can see over it. If you live upstairs, you have visual pollution, you're looking down on it. I think we need to take all those factors into consideration if we're melding it all together. It's extremely important to be sensitive to it, especially if you're going to be looking for someone to develop housing. They're going to want to be assured that the housing values or the value that they're putting into this project will be maintained by their neighbors. So I think there's a lot to be cognizant of here as we move forward.
So the sentence that said workplaces are located in close proximity to each other, housing and workplaces. So there's some contradictory, like, if you say that, then you have to broaden the uses, the workplace type uses, if we really want to have that be true. So, I would, to your point, like, you're thinking that maybe there are neighborhoods that are then within walking distance to a manufacturing, light manufacturing, whatever. Are we thinking that it's
There's some separation.
some separation versus what I would consider live-work, which is less separation. It's Pioneer Center is live-work.
But then we get into the question of how are we defining things? It's just like all the housing definitions, and then what's light manufacturing?
Well, there will be some of that, I think, as part of the refinement of, how this gets implemented. But, yeah, I think here it's just, it's good to understand, is it a separation of physical separation that there's within
Well,
This is
Steph. Is it,
Let me get to Ralph first, because I
oh,
missed
okay.
I'm getting worried that we're trying to sanitize this thing. And I'm thinking about living like in a neighborhood, the neighbors got dogs that bark all day, they got music they play loud, they have lighting that interferes with my yard. I'm in the second story and I look into their yard where they got all kinds of trash. I mean, and that's just a normal neighborhood. So,
Some things you can't get away from.
it's just part of living in proximity, and so who's to say living above the manufacturing place in Pioneer, which at night is quiet because there's no trucks, no nothing going on, it would be preferable. So I think we're trying to.
So you're on the less, I think you're in Jan's camp, like maybe a little bit less of this.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
there's
okay.
people who wanna, gonna live in
Yeah.
certain places.
And we said this can be a gritty spot.
And, you know, they work during the day, and that's when the manufacturing or truck traffic or blah, blah goes on. They'd rather be there at night when it's quiet, rather than hearing the neighbor's kids screaming.
So I don't think we're all on the same board. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of people that have this, I think, we're getting some head nods. We're
Yeah,
not.
Stephanie?
But maybe Steph first and then Travis.
I lived in Pioneer Center on, this is like 10 years ago, and, or more than that actually, 15 years ago. And I liked it.
Yeah.
Except for when TNT was pouring concrete all night long. Then their trucks would be running all night long. And, I mean, if it was a snow removal thing, I was out of the house anyway, so, or out of the place anyway, so that didn't matter. But, you know, commercial complexes, there's a lot of snow removal that goes on. So there's always gonna be that battle. What?
Did you have children at the time?
No?
This
Nope,
is
it
also-
was.
It's
So
gonna be
Steph-
built, you're gonna know what you're coming into. It's not like you build a neighborhood and then you build an airport next to it.
Stephanie, let me point out something that Tim in part raises. We deal with this on the planning commission, even with all our development code stuff. Like at the west end of Donner Lake, we have mixed use. So a commercial development wants to come in, and we have to deal with noise, what the hours of operation are gonna be, just so noise is cut off at a certain time. When we're talking about mixed use here on the river, a lot of these things would be addressed through requiring more sound insulation for a noisy development, or more filters for a project that's gonna create odors. So we shouldn't just think in terms of what uses we would and wouldn't allow. It would be more recognizing that if this is gonna be mixed use, it needs to be compatible with the people who live there.
Yeah, I think that word came up, that's the, Steph, you did have something before I cut you off.
Yes, I think visual pollution is very important to be aware of, as well as noise and so forth. Some of it can be addressed, some can't. I have a little place in San Francisco, and I'm always amazed at the neighborhood. It's above North Beach. They have garages with a storefront next to housing, apartments and nice houses, but they're maintained, and there's no storage that is seen. It's all inside storage. For one is an auto repair shop that's right there, but when they open their doors, everything's inside. I doubt that they have a lot of noise, but those kind of things can be dealt with in a way if, as planners, we're trying to realize that the neighbors' property values and the uses need to be compatible. So it's not impossible to deal with those things, but we have to be committed to doing it right so that everyone's property value and their life, the value of their life is considered.
Great, Travis?
I have a question. Jan, you're telling me that the planning commission can tell a business or an operation the hours of operation so they can make those decisions for a property owner?
It's not that cut and dry,
Well,
Travis?
I'm bringing this up because I have an operation, and if you go to my website, it says 24 hours. And I spend a lot of my nights going to work and helping people that are stranded on the highway. So that's just dumbed down on my scale and what I do. I don't know any of these other places where you have people living and potentially operations that are going, maybe some people work during the day, these people work at night. And anytime you have deliveries, they could come all hours of the night.
Yeah.
So,
But
Yeah, the situation I was thinking of was music. I wasn't thinking about nighttime deliveries. I don't know.
well, if we're putting people in housing where there's businesses below, it's not all a daytime operation, so then you're living in the same area where things are being delivered at night, and you're telling me that the planning department puts regulations on,
No, I'm not.
Jen had something to.
Well, I was gonna say, I have a home occupation permit that dates prior to the town. And even back then, through Nevada County, it is specific on hours of operation, noise, number of visitors a day, very, very specifically laid out, because it's a home occupation. It is in a neighborhood. And that's been in existence since.
but that's in a
89.
neighborhood, so we're taking,
Well, that's what we're talking about.
So, yeah.
but we're taking an area right now that's being used for a different reason.
Well, if we build housing in there, we're saying it needs to be compatible, and there may be then requirements
And that's a way
that
to
make
do
it compatible. But there may be other areas that have bigger uses, less
Less housing.
housing.
Less housing.
So maybe if we look at 40,000 feet, staff, what do we really need to give you right now?
I think this is it, if, listen to Jan first, but it sounds like this is getting to essentially, there's agreement that this is what we've been talking about for the past year in terms of helping to coalesce into words, you know, the images that we saw last week and some of the you know, activities that we've done. There might be some, a little bit massaging, you know, wordsmithing that will continue to happen, but this idea of, let's figure out, you know, how we might be able to make the compatibility work between some adding residential, but there is existing uses that stay and that we're mixing them together and really, you know, leaning into that adaptive reuse. Jan and then Travis.
Well, I know how this is gonna be received by really everyone but town and town staff, but ever since I sat on the general plan advisory committee, I probably almost every meeting said, whenever the West River thing came up, I would say, why are we treating this as one zoning district? We're really talking about a zoning district that includes Truckee Sourdough, the lighting distributor, right? Our riverfront property, you know, River Park Place along the river, Greg Henderson's property along the tracks that's far from the river. You know, I mean, that's part of why we're struggling with this, because we're like, no, we don't wanna see that on the river, but maybe it's okay against the tracks. I don't know.
It depends
I mean,
which
that's
part of
my-
the river.
It really does, I
Yeah,
really
yeah.
agree with what
That might
Jan's
get to
saying.
our
Yeah,
next
I
activity.
really agree with what he's saying.
Let's go Travis first. You had
And this may not be something that could be answered right now. I would be interested in knowing from Jack's Diner, or maybe even where you're talking Pombos, all the way to the Henriksen property, or even where the trailer park is, Donner Creek. How many units are we talking about housing-wise on top of, I mean, is there a number that we have? You know, I see some other numbers of housing units that are in here.
No, we don't have a number yet. Today we wanted to talk, you know, get some comparables to help understand that from this group's perspective about, you know, how much residential uses are we thinking about and where? Like, is there more on the riverside versus the track side or not? Where might that concentration go in terms of?
These are all examples for you to look at and understand the different types and the products. We don't, you're gonna help us decide on what a number to recommend would be.
Correct, but what I'm thinking is that there's gotta be somebody at the town that has a vision of like, oh, there should be 3,000 units from here to here. Nothing of the sort.
That's why you guys are here.
We're gonna have that vision, Travis. That's our vision.
What's your vision?
I don't know anymore, it's so clouded.
No change.
You know, I think the other thing to remember is that as time goes on, we need to, need to have a vision of what we see happening throughout all of this. Vision is pretty important. And as time goes on, businesses that may not continue where they are now, and other things will replace them that are maybe more compatible with the neighborhood and what's happening. So it isn't as if these things are cast in die. We need to see that the vision will be moving and changing as time goes on, just like the town has all along.
Have you have anything else you wanted to add to the sort of big level?
No, I think that we have to be careful on our specificity, because it can really bite us.
Yeah, I think less is more, and the key word
Yes.
that's been brought up so many times is compatible. I mean, I
Yeah.
think
Yes.
each mini zone is gonna have its own compatibility things to take into account. And I think rather than like super strict zoning the whole way, maybe we have, this area is targeted for more housing than say area B or whatever, but not like super specific, but just with a vision in mind of maybe
Yes.
housing belongs more over here, but not so much where it necks down and you're right against the railroad tracks, right? Like that kind of, but again, less is more as this vision kind of coalesces.
I would really guess that most people in this room have a different vision for, say, the Truckee sourdough location versus the property that we manage that has 1,300 feet of riverfront, you know. So I think we'll just keep spinning in circles until we actually address that issue. If we want to come up with like a vision that at least the majority of the committee can agree with, this.
There's a couple things, you know, as we go through revisions that I'd appreciate staying.
Yeah.
In the first sentence, access to a healthy Truckee River, managed access to a healthy Truckee River, I'd appreciate that staying. Again, you know, I'm one person, but whether it's literally live-work neighborhood or some other combination of live-work, but living and working and neighborhood. Higher density residential, mixing of old structures and uses with new. Why that one is important to me is it's a clear statement that we do not have the expectation that things are taken down and replaced, right? That's not what we're saying. And then I already mentioned this, but the service and light manufacturing facilities.
Anything else from others? Things that you'd like to make sure stay as this will evolve?
I don't love live-work because it has, to me, a specific connotation. It means something. I like the two concepts, but
Doesn't necessarily be live work.
yeah, exactly.
Other thoughts from people on that?
Agree.
I agree.
Agree.
Let's keep moving.
I had one
Yeah.
other thing, on the third page, West River Street area uses, allow some limited outdoor storage screened by attractive buildings.
Go
And that-
forward one slide.
Pardon me?
Yes, one of the three.
I mean, that, screening things with buildings could be problematic as well. And, I'm not,
So I'm in favor of some outdoor storage.
well, yeah, I think,
Okay, I just-
I'm not saying we don't have any, but I think we have to be sure that it's gonna be compatible. Again, the word compatible comes into play here, so that you're not spoiling a building that's, that would be looking down on, say, well, a use that's there now, say that we'd be looking down on a use that's there now that we can't change for a while, but that ultimately would be something we wouldn't want. I mean,
I
there's
think
no-
it's all very dependent on what building is next to it. There might not be any two-story buildings next to it. Again, it's like, I don't want to get overly complicated and constricted with words. Compatible. If it's a junkyard next to a two-story residence, that's not compatible.
No.
And I think as long as we keep pushing that, I think we're okay. But to mandate
But I
additional.
think screening with buildings is sort of problematic. It might work on some things, but it's somewhat problematic in my mind.
Yeah, I'm not as worried because I think a good architect or a good, like landscape I've seen it done well, so.
And it can lean into that grit factor that we all kind of liked at the last meeting.
Mhm.
If done well. And again, it just comes down to that.
But what, I think the message is you still want to make sure it's thought about.
I'm not
as
sure
part
how,
of- as part
I'm not
of the
sure how
overall
we
thing,
do
but-
that and still remain flexible, I agree.
But let's keep some.
It's
outdoors.
tough, but
Yeah, okay.
I'm in favor of outdoor storage myself.
I think there's a little bit of consensus there, maybe it's the how and making sure that
Yeah.
it still fits the
Yes.
vision is the piece that we want to make sure it works.
Apologies
That's
for
also something that we
wordsmithing,
want.
but
Yeah,
because you
no.
talk about excess light in the place name description, you should put in noise, excess of light and noise. Just add that word.
Well, let's move on to the residential pieces then. Do you guys want to move forward, Madison?
I had one more just thought. I started kind of, after our last meeting, thinking a little bit more about, like, I feel like most of this, the whole committee is kind of on the same general mindset, like, obviously, like, nicer businesses along the river, the dirtier stuff further away from the river, kind of like Jan was saying. And I was thinking, I mean, could you flip it instead of giving what's allowed, giving what's not allowed in that zoning? Like, you don't want within, 400 feet of the river, a excavation company or a tow yard, or, you know what I mean? And then allow and then implement, noise type restraints, for areas around residentials, or, time restraints, which I think could be effective, but in certain zonings of that, and then kind of, because I can see, like I mentioned a few meetings ago, I could see almost anything looking good and being effective and a viable business in that area, that we would all walk by and see a metal fabrication shop that actually was clean and tidy and organized, and they had a fenced-in yard behind their shop that was surrounded by other buildings, and no one really saw what was going on in there, and, and it was just nice. So, I don't know, I was just kind of thinking if we flipped it the other way, but maybe it'd be a smaller list of what's not allowed instead of trying to figure out what is allowed.
Yeah, that's very true. That's a good way to think about it, too. So the other conversation that we wanted to have tonight is this idea of residential, and I think, I'm guessing I'll know the answer to this, but we're gonna go for it anyway. About, what is that type of residential uses that we're really looking at? We talked very broadly about that we want to have a variety of uses, but we're just gonna test that and make sure that we're all on the same page tonight in terms of the level of variety of residential uses, and then want to talk a little bit about, where there might be focus of, we really want to have residential, a higher percentage of residential in one area of the this, sub-district of West River Street, and maybe less in another, or higher density in one area of the corridor and maybe less in another. So starting to tease those pieces out. So we're going to walk through a few slides that talk about, the different types of housing, because housing comes in different shapes and sizes. We have single-family housing, we have apartments, and then everything in between. And what you see here is what's described in many areas is like this missing middle of housing, where there's
oftentimes you get apartments on one end and single family on the other, but there's a real push to try and get a variety of housing types and mixes, and mixing those into neighborhoods in order to be able to have, different places for different people that want to live in different locations. So, we'll flip through these types. Again, those densities can either increase in density, and then also location of growth, the percentage of those uses as well. Let's keep going. These are a few examples of different types of housing, so ranging from large lot, single family detached, to clustering those single family uses. So you have shared driveways, shared alleyways to access them, and different densities that sort of range with them. So you have attached or detached townhomes, and also some people think of those as duplexes as well, where you might have two units together that are attached or detached. Tucked under townhomes, garden style, multifamily, where again, that you're clustering those townhomes around a common garden area, or you have more of apartment style buildings. And going from left to right, those increase in density as well. So the less dense, 1 to 6 dwelling units per acre, in the single family up to 30 to 90 dwelling units per acre in apartments or higher density housing types. Next slide. So these are some, just to help frame density, because that is hard to imagine in some instances. What does it mean to have 6 dwelling units per acre? This is taken from a previous presentation from Grace Crossing that looked at some different developments across Truckee and what those densities are. So you can see those locations highlighted in the circles here from Coburg Crossing, Truckee Pines, Coldstream. This is a mix of both apartments and then some townhomes as well. And if you go to the next slide, Madison, you can see what those densities are. If I sort of look through the artist lofts, tennis flats, Freshman Hollow, where we have more of apartment style units that increase in density, Coburg Crossing, that gets up to 17 dwelling units per acre, to Coldstream, which is more of the townhome model, which has 48 units and 26 dwelling units per acre, but is still fairly dense as well. So again, just at a sort of look across Truckee, places that you might be familiar with, that different housing types, depending on their arrangement and site planning, can really have a variety of densities here. Next slide. So we're just going to walk through these, and I think then come back and talk about, are there, I think to your point, Tim, it might be easier to come back here and say, are there any of these that don't make sense in this district versus which ones do you like, which ones you don't like? But from single family detached housing, thinking about lots that are 5,000 square feet or greater. We'll just flip through some of these. Tiny homes as an option. Smaller single family homes, but maybe they're clustered in lots, and maybe have around a central courtyard area. To live, work, and that means that there's workspace at the ground floor. There's a living space on the upper floor, allowing people to have commerce out of their home on a daily basis. Duplex or townhomes. Again, those could be 2, or they could be in the next slide stacked together. So you have a triplex or a 4-plex, or even stacked to a 5-plex or a 6-plex. And then small apartments, those can be around the courtyard, around central use areas, or a medium-sized apartment or stacked flats. So I guess really the question here is we just sort of reflect back on those. Are there any types that don't make
I have
sense?
a question that
Yeah.
definitely kind of, at least will influence how I think about these.
Yeah.
It's a stack question. Back to this slide where we talk about what's already here. What's the occupancy currently of these various, is everything totally full? Or
That's a
is
good question.
Coldstream half full? Just kind of getting a metric on where our current housing lies.
And the last data we got, which was a few months ago, there were a few openings of tenants. I believe there was there's a long waiting list at Artist Lofts. I believe there's a waiting list at Coldstream.
Could you
Coburn,
speak up?
Danielle?
Can't hear you.
Oh,
Can't
I
hear you.
There was a couple openings at Hennis. Coburn, do you remember?
Coburn had a couple, but for most of these projects, it was because someone was moving out and when they were waiting for the next person to move in, not because there wasn't a waiting list.
We know Artist Lofts has a long waiting list. Coldstream is full. To our knowledge, the others are full. The only one that had some vacancies, I think, was Hennis.
Okay. And do these, another clarifying question, I'm really just asking for clarifying. Are any of these vacation on this, are there vacation rentals in here, and are there prohibitions on vacation rentals?
How many units are in the artist lofts?
77.
One is a manager's unit, so there's 76 that are rented.
Do you know the size of them, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, or 1-bedroom?
They're all of those.
It's a mix.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry.
I cannot proceed.
I mean, the high numbers.
You know, I think, with the exception of the, like, large single-family home on a relatively large lot, I feel like depending on where you're looking in this relatively large zoning district, I think it's all potentially compatible. Again, you know, I wouldn't wanna see something in the urban high density, up against the river, but something that dense could be potentially appropriate elsewhere. But I do think that I'm a little concerned of some of the comments, and I know that, you know, a comment is a comment, but I'll just put a comment in that if we're looking for limiting things to 2 stories, it really kills a bunch of these different densities that we want to address in the missing middle, right? So, you know, I think the missing middle, a lot of these, I mean, it'd be great if we could click back to like a 3-story, like that one, go back, please. Sorry, the other direction. But there was a 3, there, that one. You know, something like that is like literally right in downtown. And I think it's 3 stories, and I've heard, you know, oh, no, we don't want 3 stories. And as a potential developer of locals housing, I really worry about those comments, you know, because I think it's not realistic to limit it to less than 3 stories.
Just a question on the artist lofts. How many businesses are at the artist lofts?
Like underneath?
Yeah, because there's businesses down there, right?
There's the art studio area that they have, and that's it currently.
Okay.
That's
The rest are,
occupied.
right, the rest are vacant.
They're vacant.
Yeah.
How many, do we know how many are there?
Well, it's like a 3,000 square foot space.
And how many, just one space, 3,000 square feet?
Right now, it's not built out. Yeah.
The Community Foundation is planning to occupy, or hoping to occupy.
We hope not.
So the whole space is 3,000 square feet?
It's a major mistake if they are.
And there's only one occupied people in there, one business.
Currently.
Community Foundation.
Oh, what a shame.
They could, someone could come in and build it out if they wanted to, but no one's
And
done
what,
that.
potentially, how many businesses could go there?
Not really a limit.
It
3,
it
4?
depends on how they
Yeah.
size it out.
So, building on Jan's comment, are there residential uses that don't make sense? And again, this is
Yeah,
I'll
Maybe
comprehensive
Jan
all types
said
of
this and you
residential.
picked it up, but
Yeah.
not single family.
Just not
Not
large
big
lots.
single family.
I'm not
Absolutely
in
not.
favor, just to be clear, what I'm saying for myself, no single
No
family, even this, for me, no. I mean, other people, again, might disagree, but,
I'm not there.
yeah.
I think there are spaces that could have single-family, East River Street.
But we're just talking West River right now, so just the West River.
Okay. When do we talk?
We will talk East River.
That's
I was
next,
thinking we.
that'll be next January.
We're just
Yes.
gonna-
Wow, I thought we were, yeah.
No, I feel like that one's an easier talk for about that.
Okay.
I think that there could be single families along Donner Creek pretty easily.
Donner.
or even on some of West.
But there could be some scaling down, like more dense, closer to some of the existing development and
Yeah.
scaling back towards
I
Donna
could agree
Creek.
with you.
Yeah, I agree with Tim on that, but one other thing. I think 3 stories, it depends on where on West River Street. Because if it's across the road, that's different than on the
Well,
riverside.
Riverside Drive has 3-story houses.
I understand that, but I just.
Because they have a slope.
Yeah.
They don't appear as 3-story
Right.
houses, but they are.
I think, but if we're looking, oh, sorry, go ahead, I'll comment later.
Yeah, I just think it's really important. I think some of these property owners have amazing visions. And I want us to listen to them and their ideas. And I'm worried that we're telling the property owners that we're interested in your vision and we're gonna support your vision, and yet we're deciding what's going to be there. I'm really concerned about this whole
When are we
discussion.
doing that? Like,
I feel we are.
Aren't
I
we
am
just putting some
concerned about it.
guardrails on there?
Well,
aren't
I
there
think
just
we need to
guardrails?
do that. I just want us to be cautious in the process we're in right now.
Okay.
Of like a harsh yes or no
Yeah.
on each
Yes.
So we're
side.
not there.
Yes.
Let's get Jessica first.
I have 2 comments. One, I think it might be valuable just for, it's late now for this conversation, but maybe for this group to get the housing report from Mountain Housing Council to look over. So I know some of us have seen it. We know the data and the numbers of the amount of units we're missing and who we're missing and stuff, but there are people in the room that probably don't know that information. So maybe if staff could send that out, that might be helpful. And then my other comment on just the single family, not taking that out of the equation, as someone that like lives in a townhome, I would like to be able to aspire to something that's smaller single family that doesn't really exist here right now. And so I think that's a personal, coming from a personal place, like, I don't always wanna live in a townhouse, but I don't also think I'm gonna buy a big house in Tahoe. So like, I think that there's room for some single family. I wouldn't want us to totally get rid of that idea, because I think we could still use some of
So
that.
is that a scale piece?
It might be a scale piece, I don't feel like I'm smart enough to figure that out, but,
I think for me, the difficulty that I have with the single-family houses is, even if they're 1,500 square feet, right? I also agree with you, there's hardly anything that's 12 or 1,500 square feet. But that they're so much, more easily becoming vacation rental homes, not actually homes that people who live year-round would occupy. And even at smaller square footage, become exclusive because of the West River Street. So it's not that I'm opposed to single-family homes per se, but it's the conversion to vacation rentals and the exclusivity.
I think you'd see that with townhomes too. If you're on the river, it's
Yeah.
not the type of house that's gonna determine if somebody wants to rent it out or vacation.
Yeah, I
It's
agree,
the
I agree with
location.
you. The point you're making is valid, and you could make that same point for apartments or in the larger number of units as well.
Right.
You could, totally you could, but it's easier when it's single-family homes. It's easier for that conversion to happen.
just to clarify, so multifamily homes cannot short-term rent currently.
Okay.
So that argument for.
But they could be second
townhomes-
homes.
They could be second.
Right, yeah.
I think it's important to recognize maximizing the value of this area for housing. And once you've read the report, you recognize
Yeah.
the need is so desperate now for housing. To me, it would squander opportunity and squander property that we have very little of left to build housing for this community. Even though I think it's wonderful for people to have a single-family home, building them here doesn't mean they're going to be any more financially within the realm that people, the study's going to show us that people need. But what we need is housing, lots of it. And we should look.
We need variety as
Well,
well.
I'm not saying we don't need variety. I'm saying we desperately need variety.
I wanted to add that on.
Yeah, variety is very important. I look at all of these blocks, and I'm personally not opposed to 4 stories or 5 stories if they were up against the view shed of the mountain behind, on Hippie Hill, because that hides height. So I think we should be open to all of that. We talked about, looking at, what do you call it, form-based. We look at sort of, this is where form-based might work well in visualizing where forms could be taller or smaller.
Yeah, or even on other sides, if it's stepped.
Yes,
right, that you
if it's
can
stepped
mask
up.
the scale of the building
Yes,
in
so
many different ways.
form might work good in the planning of what we're trying to do here, so it might be something to look at.
Or some of the design guidelines.
Yes,
around that.
yes.
Any thoughts on that idea of design guidelines to help with some of the height?
Yeah, I was thinking, like Stephanie was saying, that as the land approaches the hillside, that buildings stagger up to heights we haven't thought about, against the hill, and step down as it leaves, so it really doesn't look like a monolith in the middle of a lot, like artist lot.
But the one in the example is up against the hill.
It is up
Yeah.
against the hill, and it's a very nice project. I think it's a great project over there.
Isn't there, I remember being at a town council meeting, they were talking about heights on buildings. I don't know if it's a planning commission or something, but I think there's already something somewhere, the height of a building can only be how tall? 5 feet or something?
It's 50 for a lot of the commercial areas.
A lot of the commercial,
Commercial, manufacturing,
or what about residential?
residential depends on where, but that's mostly 35.
Okay, so we're potentially talking, what, you say 50 feet?
I think Wallace and Steph's point, that is something
Yeah, it's
that
not even 3
I think
stories, so.
we could probably work through in terms of thinking about how you can achieve some height in the areas. and
Well, there's also
Right.
the-
fit within.
with affordable housing, that you can go higher.
The state density bonus?
Hmm?
The state density bonus?
Yeah, so that, that 50-foot limit isn't a limit, really.
If
Depends
we-
what you're doing.
And if the steering committee, in particular in the situation we're in right now, if the steering committee were to say in our action plan that goes to town council, that we supported higher than the current various limits that there are, that would carry a lot of weight if that came from us. If we want to make that recommendation with all the qualifications that we would have. So it could, we've heard repeatedly, some of these things can shift. And if we make that kind of recommendation, that could potentially happen.
How tall is the artist lofts right now?
It's 50 feet.
It is 50, and then there's, the stairwell goes a little bit above that, but I think it's 4 stories? Yeah, you can fit about 4 stories in 50 feet if you have, taller ceiling heights still.
Can I make just a couple observations from what we experienced along Donner Pass Road in the gateway area between the village nursery and the west end of town? And Aaron Hussein did an economic study, and essentially what came out of that development becomes less and less feasible the lower the density is. And they were essentially saying even with a 4-story building and going up to 30 units per acre, you still were gonna need to subsidize it in some fashion just because of land costs and construction costs. And we may see that play out in terms of the people that are submitting applications. They may come in saying, the only kind of real estate development that's gonna make money for me is high-density housing. Not commercial, not services, high-density housing. And then that'll kind of, the rubber meets the road. I mean, we really have to face up to what kind of recommendation we want to make, because the lower the density, the lower the height, the less viable developments.
John does have a point, that, if you want housing. to make it pencil.
And coming back to Lisa's point about single-family homes and the tension between second homeowners and residents, even with townhouses, you can see how the nature, the style, the investment in the building can dictate who's gonna live there. And the irony is, if you look at the new townhomes over in the villages by Gray's Crossing, you know, those are 1.5 million or what have you. Those are second homes for Bay Area people. But if you look at the townhomes south of the middle school, down in there, well, those are all working people, and clearly the construction was much, much less than the stuff you're seeing at Gray's. So there's a lot of factors that we can't just address by saying we're gonna allow a townhouse or not, because it's gonna.
Fair
depend
enough.
what
That's
that-
how I agree.
it's- So, kind of identifying
Well, I got a
issues without
newsflash, none of
answers.
this stuff is affordable. I mean, you go to Coachland right now and they're selling boxes that got trucked in for like $4.99, and you still have to pay a space rent. So like,
Yeah,
It's expensive.
yeah.
Well,
And then I think,
well, this is a little political portion of this, but I think when you get the government subsidized programs like artist lofts, like it attracts a
Or
group
Cold
of people
Spring.
that I think a lot of property owners don't really want, a lot of locals don't really want. And I'm not picking on those people, I'm just picking on the where the funds are coming from. And that even with Hennis Flats and those ones, the rent has been decreased. And I understand that purpose is to get the locals, give them a place to live, you know, but it creates a lot of other issues, you know, that I don't know if I understand the problem, but I don't know if it's the town's responsibility to fix that problem. I think that my brother lives in Santa Barbara, was just down there. He has the hardest time finding workers to work for him. He's a contractor because the laborers are $50 an hour, but there's no housing. So they have to drive, you know, 2 hours to get to work. But if we allow people to build housing here, the rents are gonna go up for everybody, if they have a unit. But if it's private money and it's put into that the rent is gonna be higher. And that money is gonna have to come from somewhere. And so it will come from the people building their second homes. And the laborer rates will be $40 or $50 an hour. And that's all, you know, free market. When people wanna build a house in Tahoe, the prices are just gonna be higher, like Aspen, and, you know, and if you get in early, then you benefit from the increase in the housing values. But I don't know I think a lot of the issues with the housings, the low-income housings in Truckee is because of the government subsidies on it.
So I got a couple of different talking points there, and I wanna pull it back to West River. So can you help me direct that comment into how that might shape residential uses within this area of the river corridor for West River? Is that?
Well, the dollars
about
all
trying to make it
change.
affordable,
So the dollars all
but-
change for a developer. If they do high density, but then they're capped on how much they can rent the unit for, then they have to pull government money to help subsidize to make it worth it. But if you just let an individual developer come in, and they're gonna do their own calculation and be like, hey, I can do 90 units on this piece of property,
Yeah, 'cause
and I can lease these out for $3,000 a unit a month.
Can I
don't
try
think
to
that money-
articulate, let me try to articulate where
Yeah.
Tim's going. We're looking for how can we build workforce housing rather than income-restricted housing.
That's where I was thinking.
And isn't that that's what actually,
Is that-
kind of,
But is
from
that-
everyone
I
that's
also don't-
spoken
So not
up.
government
But
subsidized.
if government subsidizes it, then the income gets restricted.
Well, it
Correct?
Depends on the program, no. You're thinking of the conventional form of government subsidies. I'm using the term much more broadly. I don't care where the money comes from.
Okay.
The
But I
town-
mean,
the
just
town has-
what has happened in Truckee with artist lofts,
But
even
Tim,
Hennis
you're-
Flash and
You're
Frischman's
not
and those.
saying, I'm a little bit confused about what you're saying.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting that we give up making recommendations for residential on West River Street?
No, not
Okay,
at all.
So what
The
could we recommend?
vision of where it's going is I think we're gonna end up with more artist loft style, which is kind of not necessarily what Truckee needs and wants, you know? If it's just like you know, build a gazillion units and stack them in there. They're all modulars and they just all
Yeah,
get stacked up.
high-rise, four-story.
Right, cause those guys,
So can
they're
we-
doing
is
the
there a
numbers
way-
and they're just
I
going,
guess-
hey,
Is there a way
okay,
we
it's limited.
can-
What?
Is there a way we can say what, from your point of view, would be optimal with regard to residential?
Well, I think if there's, and I don't know how, but the town really wants that high density, or in some areas at least. And so if that's encouraged in this area, that's what you're gonna end up with. You're gonna end up with Colburn Apartments, which is just a bunch of boxes that are imported and they're junk, you know?
What do
and-
you want?
What do I want?
Yeah.
I think the property owner should make the decision. So I think that you should be able to maximize, there should be some guidelines, like you're saying, like up against the hill, more units, closer to the river, maybe less units. But I think the property owner should be able to do the math themselves and figure out, like, okay, without government subsidies, how am I gonna make this work? And there's no restrictions on how much they rent that property for. They set their pricing based on going market, which is, they're gonna fill them, all of them, you know, and they are allowed to build and make their money on it.
Well, if we can build without subsidies, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
So if we go back to that
Ideal.
graphic
Yeah,
that
sounds
you had
ideal.
that showed the missing middle graphic. Like,
It's curious, Tim, so you don't like Coburn Crossings? Or do you?
No,
'Cause
I,
that's workforce
no, I mean, it's fine,
apartments.
it's fine, it's just it's really garbage construction, and it's because they have to build a ton of units for a small place, and they're not built very well.
or let's talk
And none of
about-
them are, the Hennis Flats aren't built very well,
No, I was
Fisherman's
asking about
Hollows aren't,
Coburn, though. I haven't.
Colburn's not very good construction, we built it. We did a lot of work.
So, I do wanna come back, and I appreciate what they said, but I just wanna make sure I'm capturing the comment correctly, because I think what I hear is that, you want to allow for the property owner to have the ability to build residential uses, but residential uses that meet the program that they would like to achieve.
Mhm.
So based on their own market performa, you know, what makes sense for their property.
Yeah, I mean,
Is that fair?
there's a lot of, you know, restrictions where if you're, like, there's this one that I was looking at on Donner Lake that's, you guys, most of you guys probably already know about it. It's Reyes Construction built it, and there's a lot of restrictions on that piece of property. So he has studios above garages, and that density of that complex could be way better, way more.
Yeah.
And it would, you know, make the owner more money, make it easier to sell that project, because he's trying to sell it now, or maybe has already. And all it needs to be is just changing a couple of the guidelines. But he's so restricted with the guidelines that they had for that development, that it's just a bunch of little buildings that you could double. There's enough parking, there's enough everything on site to double the occupancy on that. And then that project pencils out. But right now, it's like right at this, well, is it worth it, or do I just put my money in the bank and let it gain interest?
Okay.
That's
Well,
from Donner Lake.
I think that on a lot of levels, we're
Behind those.
all saying very similar things, is that we want to encourage flexibility. But then I also hear, in like literally the same sentence, and I'll call my friend Pam out on this one, you know, is that we want this flexibility, these, you know, property owners or the developer or whatever has a pretty good idea of what's gonna work, you know, things like that. And, you know, I'm thinking, well, I'm trying to redevelop a property for locals housing south of West River Street, maybe not right up against the river, but south of West River Street. And, you know, if you tell me that you can't, you know, your property is currently zoned for 3.5 stories and up to 50 feet, and we're gonna downzone it, and you can't build anything over 2 stories, I'm gonna be like, okay, I'm gonna sell this property at a loss, because, like, you know, it was basically zoned for something more dense, and we had a hard time making it work, and now it's not gonna work at all, right? So I think, you know, I think having, I think we need to stand by this flexibility, and you know, I'm not suggesting we should build an artist loft, you know, on the river or something, but I do think that if we limit, you know, some of these 3-story, I mean, I don't think that there's a neighborhood in our community that doesn't have 3-story homes, right? I mean, they're they're in Glenshire, they're in Olympic Heights, they're in Donner Lake, like, you know, whenever somebody says, oh yeah, we can go 3-5 stories maybe along the tracks, but, you know, on the south of West River Street, which is my vested interest, I'm like, whoa, you know, let's not downzone it too much.
So we, you know, of course, what we're struggling with, which several of you have all said, what we're struggling with here is what the town and the counties are struggling with deeply, and nobody's been able to solve it, right?
Right.
So we aren't gonna be able to solve it either. We can't. And the more prescriptive we get, the worse we're gonna make the problem,
Yep.
right?
Agreed.
The more prescriptive we
Agreed,
get. So
agreed.
somehow, we need some help doing this. We need a way to be able to say in our action plan that we do strongly support residential housing in the West River Street area. But we couldn't crack the code, right? We couldn't put together the recipe that's gonna be right. Well, I mean, we just, even if we
Because there is
stayed
no
here another
recipe.
8 hours.
It's
we
not that
fix
we
it.
can't do it, there
Well,
is
yeah.
no recipe to be had,
Yeah.
right?
Right. So that brings me back to maybe where we started here. What form do we see housing taking where? And not worry about what's inside the form. It's housing.
Even that's gonna be pretty rough though,
That's
because
pretty
we get to the,
prescriptive.
what's been
No,
articulated.
well, we've got to, I'm not saying it has to be specific, but you've got to know if you're going to put a lot of housing below the tracks in that area, or mixing it with commercial, what form does that take?
I heard one person say, or I thought I heard him say, the building height should taper from the railroad side of our district to the river. Like you put the tall stuff on the north side of the road and the short stuff on the south side. That's just.
Yeah, but
But
that's,
again, that's-
John's point
freaked
is.
out.
I know.
Yeah. And
So
I
we'll
think,
start
Yeah.
at
How
5
hard is that?
stories
It's
and
gonna
we'll
be
go
rough.
down to 3.
Down to 1. I don't know,
Well,
you
he,
know?
well, he
No, but
went to
again,
one, but he went
it
to
depends
three,
where you
so
are,
yeah.
east to west, too.
I'm gonna add
Scratch
another
that.
word, because we've had flexibility, we've had compatibility, and I also think it needs to be feasible, right? Like, you need to have the,
Yeah, that's what Tim's saying.
yeah, you need to
feasible.
have
Yeah.
the pieces so that you can have the height where you need it and to allow you to actually build a project that will pencil.
Right.
Jessica had a comment.
I have 2 questions. The first discussion question, which isn't up there anymore, but was what types of residential buildings densities do you like? I think the answer to that is all of them, right? Did we get there? I know
I
that
think so,
we're,
other than, I think
Other than
the.
except for single family, we're But kind I- of.
for single
Okay.
but I
family.
think some of us are not on that page about excluding single
Yeah.
family, depending on
Depending on
where
where.
Well,
and how
large
big.
lots, so if you said,
Yeah,
Yeah.
so if we could say single-family housing
small lot.
on smaller
On
lots.
smaller lots.
Yeah.
Then
Bigger
we-
houses.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean.
'Cause it's
maybe we
compatible
call
with
it
existing.
a half acre or a third acre.
I'm just trying
you
to
know, like
remember
what-
what
what
we're
size.
Well, I think that already exists on
opened
the
up another
river,
rabbit.
right?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah, places.
But
Wait,
so
go to
two
the next
houses,
Jessica.
you land on one house. And what we're saying is that that's not okay.
well, is that true? Would the town allow that? Like, let's take, for instance, Pombo's property is like a little over an acre, and I think that's 44 units an acre, right, where Pombo is?
Well,
So if something changed, he would have to put 44 or more units in there, is that?
if we said we wanted that, it might be considered by the council.
Well,
It
right-
probably would get mixed, but
It would be
what we're saying
considered.
is, let's
But wait,
say
Joan.
what we want.
I wanna
I'm gonna
stop
time out, 'cause
this for-
Jessica had 2.
Yeah, but
so she
this
has a
is
milk-
really important, I'm
So
sorry.
wait,
For public session, Joan, I really don't want anyone saying we are assuming what we're going to do on a property owner's piece of property. If we want, I heard you say if we want to put X on Pombo's, we
So,
cannot be
no,
saying
what I'm
that.
saying is, the conversation was about single-family houses.
Yes,
And all we were trying to do is say that you can't put them on a large lot. You can't put one house, one single-family house on a large piece of property.
Yeah.
So limiting the housing by that factor. And my example was somebody could buy a big, like, he's saying it doesn't exist, and I'm saying, well, maybe it doesn't right now, but it could. And do we want to say that that's an okay use for the land along
it
West
depends
River Court?
upon what the Pombos want as well.
I don't think she meant to specifically carve out the Pompous.
No.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Even though that was said.
This comes to
She
mind.
wasn't
This
said
comes
that.
to mind.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
so-
yeah,
so
she was
back to
referring to
Jessica.
that.
So I think it might be.
Travis, yeah, brought up the Pompos.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it might be helpful if we kind of take a step back and think, okay, let's talk about the south side of the river, what do we want there? Let's talk about the north side, what do we want there? Let's talk about next to the railroad tracks. I think we're all talking about everything a little too all over the place, and we're talking over each other, and we're saying a lot of the same things, and I feel like maybe it would be, I think we're saying a lot of the same stuff, but it would be helpful for Stephanie probably if we're like, okay, let's talk about where Jan's property area is, like what's the vision there, and then do that instead of trying to talk over.
But I wanna make sure that we're comfortable with that, cause we're not
Yeah.
gonna say
'Cause that was
Jan
the
has
next
to
part.
do.
No.
X,
I
Y,
don't think we're comfortable with
So,
that.
Okay.
but we do wanna know, are you more comfortable with single family in one area or another on the?
I just want to make sure that Jessica's point, though, is, I mean, it's aligned with what I was saying, Pam was saying, yes, this is an issue, but it keeps getting kicked. I don't expect that in this meeting, we're gonna have time to, like, go, okay, let's take this area, because we don't even know what the area looks like. But I would suggest for next meeting that if there is a reasonable way to look at it from a zone perspective, that we have that carved out.
Something
And
similar
then
to
we
what
could have
we
a
did with the
conversation.
maps.
Yeah, so if you wanna flip forward to like the.
I don't think,
No, this is
I
not
think we're
your-
gonna end up prescriptive if we do that. I have to say, I question even that approach.
We agreed to
really.
mixed use.
It's on here. I was
Yeah.
just
So
following
mixed-
the directions.
So,
I think
and
you
that
have a
was
great
one of the
point.
places where we were trying to head of, as the
Yes.
distillation of some of the exercises that we've done, so just as like quadrating out, some of the commonalities of those exercises was residential up in the western portion, medium density residential in that brownish bubble, more of adaptive reuse commercial mixed use within the green area, and then within blue, that was much more like mixing in with existing and was more trying to integrate residential, but it's much more into that mixed use zone. So one of the questions that has come up is like, where would single family actually be appropriate? So if we just took the single family housing out of the zones, just with West River District, would there be a place where large lots would ever meet this group's vision? Not on a certain property, but just in general.
I mean, Donner Creek, but not necessarily large
But
lots.
some
but
single family maybe.
Single family?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thoughts from the group in terms of that comment, but
Agreed.
maybe
I agree.
Tiny
smaller
homes or cluster homes, I think.
Smaller
they're-
homes or smaller lots, single family could make sense in that
Or
location.
condos.
Or condos, yeah, okay.
When we talk
Are there
about,
other places? Yeah.
when we talk about lots, though, what about just smaller house size?
Yeah, smaller house size would work too, I think
Mhm.
Jessica's right, like the 12.5.
Yeah, and I think I don't have the report right in front of me, but we talk a lot about the units we're missing in the missing middle, but we are missing units also in single family, when you look at that report. It's not, we always talk about missing middle, but there are other things we're missing.
Right.
Yeah.
What's the greatest need?
Missing middle, but that doesn't mean that you need to say we can't do some of everything, right?
Everything.
Yeah,
And it goes by AMI and.
yeah, it's more
Stephanie,
complicated.
it goes by AMI and then,
Family
also,
size.
number of bedrooms.
Yeah.
I can tell you, somebody, I mean, I think
So-
it's a pipe dream to believe somebody's gonna build a single-family home in this area and make it work.
You know what, I think me and you were there, but also, it's not a hill to die
No,
on. The
but I'm
market will
saying,
take
if
care of
if
it,
you wanna
right?
allow someone to do it,
Winter Creek was built very large, single families on very small lots.
Right.
And, they did it, I couldn't believe how many houses they got into that, and they're all sold, and they,
but those are more like, they are single-family
they're
units.
all single family units on
Yeah,
very
okay,
small.
so
Okay,
let's keep going.
Is there any anywhere else?
Because there's a couple things, really what we need to know, what we're getting at is, are you interested in single family or not? We can't limit size, so you don't, that's a state law.
Yeah,
We
I was
can't
gonna
say
say.
only 1,200 square feet.
But you can limit the
Somebody
size
wants-
of the lot. Can't you?
You can't do square, maybe a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure state law says you don't have to have a minimum lot size, but it doesn't have a maximum.
We're falling into the prescriptive
Yeah.
traffic.
Yeah.
again.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
what
We
we
are.
wanna do is take back the feedback we're getting, like, we're okay with single family, maybe in the right place, that would be good for us. To, Jan, to your point, we can't downzone your property, so even if everybody said they only wanted 1 story on your property, unless you agreed to downzone it, and we leave
So
that.
I should just
open.
relax.
Yes. Don't freak out over there.
That's good.
but-
I'm glad you told him that.
Yeah. There are constraints that we're gonna have to work with, so that's why the high level, single family, yes, no, condos, yes, no, then we have to come back and tell you where that can work
Yeah.
within
Yeah.
some of the already existing
Yeah.
zoning. So some of
Yes.
this you're getting too far into the
Yep.
weeds
Yeah.
on,
Yes.
and we just need to pull back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think we might just move on from there. Are there other residential uses that came up that anybody said definitely no? Because to me, I feel like this group was fairly open.
Well, I worry about urban high density, at least how much of it, you know, like, so we have some, if we had some up against the hillside, you know, maybe we could make it look better than what's in the pictures, but if we do a lot of it, I think we've changed the character of our community. And then, so then I think you've tipped over.
So maybe that's where
into
compatible
a-
comes in again,
Yeah,
right? Like if you have 3 of those
yeah.
urban centers, that's not compatible with the
Yeah, it's like, so now it doesn't feel like a
Right.
rural community if there's a bunch of high rises.
Right.
And then I think it's not worth, the housing's not worth it to me.
Yeah.
I just think, you know, living here for 35, 40 years myself, I'm all about community character, but let's face it, the community character, depending on how you define it, is always changing. And you know, what's happened out here has changed the character. What's gonna happen here, I mean, you know, you can't tell Travis that anything we're talking about isn't gonna change the character of West River Street. I mean, that's our goal. I mean, you know, so.
I agree with you, but I also know that, like, the town of Davis limited the height of their buildings throughout their downtown. And they kept a feel in their community of a small town, because they didn't allow high-rise after high-rise after high-rise that creates nothing but shadow on the street, you know?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm talking about, is like, what is that point where you don't wanna go that next step because you're going to make it a very different place?
I'm not advocating for 5-story buildings myself.
Okay.
You know,
I think if they're designed properly and broken up, I don't see a problem with them, but
And against it.
against the hill only, but,
Build them and they'll come.
well,
It's more tires we can
it
sell,
goes-
and more
it goes-
more rubber that goes in the river. So,
So I want
I
to
mean,
be
that's
respectful
what
of the
happens.
time, because we have about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
The other question that we had, so we had, you know, the uses of different types of residential, but are there areas of the corridor that make sense to have more residential or be more dense than other parts?
the,
We talked about it a little bit.
of
but are
the
there-
portion that I think the portion we're talking about is against the tracks.
So the portion
that-
against the tracks.
That,
is higher.
the entire length of it, if we're going to make it, if this is a mixed-use process, are we actually going to say it should be here or there?
No, I think we just want to know if there's areas where we might want to have higher density.
No.
No.
I mean, I'm repeating myself. Thank you for your patience, everyone with me. I don't think we should prescribe it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You mean allow it or prescribe it?
Prescribe it.
About where the density goes. Allow more density, but not prescribe where.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
I'm saying.
See what.
Okay, we agree.
Finally.
Awesome.
We do quite often.
And I'm happy to backpedal off of my, you know, like, hey, we're treating this all as one zoning district if we don't get too prescriptive. And I think that was Lisa's point, right, is that, like, if we start looking at these different areas, then it's gonna invite us to become quite prescriptive.
I don't want us to become prescriptive.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think that when I've seen the conversations become prescriptive, I
Yes.
start going, why are we talking about it all as one uniform zoning district? But if we're comfortable with being less prescriptive, I'm comfortable with us looking at it as one zoning district.
So as a community, as a group, you guys are okay that there could be a 5-story on the river?
No,
Well, if you're not prescriptive, that's what you're saying.
we're talking, I thought we were talking about the area that isn't
No,
on the
we're
screen.
No, just,
No.
is
The
there
whole
an
area.
that
The whole
should have
thing.
higher density?
Is
Or maybe
there-
the question,
Height
like
and height.
Tim's, or what's that?
I think
or is
Lisa's
it
saying
area
it's
of
okay.
lower density?
Am I right? You're okay?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of what we've been talking about for months and months and months is there's a context for the kinds of uses that we're talking about, whether it's, an open space kind of use or a park kind of use, or whether it's residential or commercial, types of commercial. There's a context for it, a visual context, a functional context, and literally that it's on the river. And so I've learned a lot from that the past few months, and this evening I've learned a lot. And so, when I walked in the door, I probably wouldn't have said, sure, I can sign up to a 5-story building near the river. But, like, I'm hearing it all tonight, and there's if we do our job right, in the action plan, there'll be a context for what we're saying. So 3 5-story buildings right next to each other? No. I mean, that's gonna be really, really uncomfortable, but maybe one on Jan's property, maybe that will be needed and will need to
And
work.
Right? Maybe it'll work.
I'm really
Personally-
committed, as you can tell, to no single family
So I feel like the
homes.
language could be crafted such that, there's allowed uses, but there needs to be variety between parcels and properties. It can't have a uniform look and feel, right? And that then potentially takes your 3 5-story buildings right next to each other out of the picture, because that's too much.
Yeah, I'll just remind you that was what they said about August Lofts.
That is true.
Say that again?
That is what we said for Artist Lofts.
Yeah.
And that's my fear.
Right,
Right, it's
right.
not gets
It's,
built and it
it's,
just
leg-
goes there.
it's risky. It is for sure risky.
Well, I think anything that close to the river, remember the view shed is important.
Yep.
To the community, and if you put 5-story buildings there, it's not,
I know.
in my estimation, it's not appropriate.
And that's the hard
This
part
is
with
the-
Riverside Drive, is
this-
no view shed.
Yes.
Well, and same with
This is
John's
where-
property. There's no view shed there unless you're on your property, right?
Well, I was gonna point out, I'm glad, because, obviously you've spent a lot of time planning on that, but when you're driving down West River Street, you do not see the river. I'm sorry, but you don't. And if you're standing on our property, at this point, you don't see the river. If you're 40 feet from the river's edge, you still don't see the river, right? And if you put a 1-story building there, I guarantee you can't see the river. So really what you're looking at as a view shed is the mountains behind it, which is really a similar thing, right? There are mountains on the other side of the river that, is your skyline, right? And so it's happy to do tours, but, the reality is whether you build a 1-story building or a 3-story building, and I'm actually not advocating for a 5-story building, but 1-story building or a 3-story building or a 3.5 or a 3-story building with a 4-story pop-up or something, your view of the river from West River Street is gonna be no different, whether it's a 1-story building or a 3-story building, because what you're gonna see really is the mountain behind it.
I'm gonna be a devil's advocate on that, because what you should be able to see, because there's a river there, is cottonwoods and aspen trees.
Which you can't.
On our property, not really, but.
Well, that would be part of the
That's
future.
part of the restoration.
We're talking about restoration. So,
Yeah,
I'm not gonna just take what you say on.
It's really
blind.
hard.
But, if you
I
have
can't.
aspens and cottonwoods and willows, whether you put a 2-story building there or a 3-story building, it's not gonna be a big
Yeah.
difference.
But I think to what
I
Lisa
don't
was-
know, but riparian vegetation is a big surrogate for the water itself. That tells me there's a river
Yeah.
there.
But
And
to
I take
Jan's point, if
solace
if
from
you
that.
build, you build, right? It's, the height isn't gonna change how many trees you rip out necessarily.
That's why I
Or
said
how
devil's
easy
advocate.
you can
Yeah.
see them from the road.
Well, we certainly want to plant trees and not rip any
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
But I think to Lisa's point, this idea of, you know, the context of all the different sites as they move forward is really important. So it can be done, maybe, right, with some taller, denser buildings and still preserving the
I'm good with this no uniform.
Maybe
method.
it's,
You know, it's just, it gives the developers the heebie-jeebies because, you know, they're coming to the planning commission with, that's a form-based code thing, right?
I have a legal question. So could you, is it legal to put in code up to 3 stories is allowed, 5 stories with like special use permit on top of that? So like it's not carte blanche that you can build 5 stories, but maybe there's an opportunity presented that there is an allowance for it, but it has to go through a special use permit process. Is that even something that's legally allowable or that we would even want?
I don't carry malpractice anymore, but I'll go ahead and say, yeah, you could do it.
Or if there was a different type of, you know, amenity,
As long
like
as it
river
is.
access or
Right.
something else, that you could get a density bonus or a height bonus.
Right, so that could take away some of that fear of.
And maybe there's also something about, I don't know what Plan A was for the artist lofts, and we ended up with Plan B. I don't understand
A lot got
what
derailed
happened
throughout that
from,
process.
yeah, Plan A to Plan D and what the gap was. But, and again, I'm not saying we literally do a case study on that, that's not what I'm saying. But conceptually understanding what happened and for us to talk about guardrails so that doesn't happen here.
What I would say primarily happened is our desire for any affordable housing in this community was such a driving factor that we were willing to make many, many, many design concessions.
Yeah.
And that will continue to be a driver in this community.
Yes.
Yeah, artist lofts is dominating too much of this
Yeah.
conversation.
But it's understandable.
Right,
It
yeah,
is.
yeah, because it still gnaws at people. The, can I come
We
back
could go
to
to
innovate?
Coldstream if you'd like to.
Yeah, Rob had one.
I have a lot to say about
Let me-
Coldstream.
Rob and then, yeah.
And then you-
Isn't our mission here to create a vision of, given all the parameters of maintaining, rural community, blah, 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 of coming up with a vision of what seems to be good, appropriate development along the river corridor, the area we're looking at, and whether you call that prescriptive or not, I think there has to be, I mean, we can talk about this pie in the sky and airy-fairy, but we gotta, I think, wanna come up with something that has some meat to it. So if we're talking about building height and where would it be appropriate in this corridor to have buildings of size X, Y, or Z, or density, so that we end up with this somewhat prescriptive vision that guides how we want it to look.
Yeah, I think.
And if we just say, well, we don't wanna infringe on any developer's rights to do what they want, then why are we here?
But I think what we have heard throughout the conversation too is this idea of flexibility and being able to make sure that there is the ability for people to do projects to achieve the vision. So I think that's where, you know, making sure that we're not so prescriptive with things that.
Yeah, that's the hard dance,
Yeah, so
I
it-
get.
And in the
So-
future, like, nothing's happened. We had that plan, and it never got built.
Right.
So do we want it to ever happen?
To be very clear, sorry, the current zoning we have in this district is incredibly prescriptive,
That's,
and it's incredibly restrictive.
It's crippling.
So what we're doing here is a lot,
yeah,
right?
Yes.
it's maybe.
So
the
Jan,
same.
and then I do wanna make sure we have time for public
Okay.
comments, so Jan.
Just
and then
following
we'll
up,
come back.
even on what Rolf said. Rolf said a prescriptive vision. On Innovate Gateway, they talked about wanting to have a very specific and precise vision, and then regulatory flexibility. And when they talked about housing, there's about 30 things here in terms of strategies for Donner Pass Road. And there's only one of those is housing, which says encourage smaller and more affordable units. And then everything else is kind of directed at making it pedestrian friendly.
Which goes back to our sort of description statement that we looked at earlier of like, does that embody what we've been talking about at the high level for this area? Are we on? And then we'll wrap up.
That's good.
I mean, I don't think we have an urban developer in the group, but, you know, I don't think that we have to say, hey, you can build up to 5 stories. I mean, I think that if you took something and had a very similar, you know, to say a commercial downtown, 4 stories, 50 feet, I think there's a lot of room in that to develop. Is just my 2 cents. Like, when people are starting to talk about 5-story buildings, I'm starting to get uncomfortable a little bit, saying, well, I'm not sure I don't think we need to do that to make it flexible. I'm not saying that, like, you know, you go to Chamonix and there's plenty of 5-story buildings, right?
Oh, yeah. We don't need that.
Thoughts from the group on that?
Not the model we're going for.
Yeah, it's not.
No,
Yeah, okay.
We're not doing
Maybe I used the
Chamonix.
wrong word.
don't want to be in Chamonix, no.
Not a good example
Yeah, sorry.
for
So 3 and
Chamonix.
4 story as a litmus for the group versus 5-story, I'm comfortable. Maybe a few 5-story Jones.
Looking at Jen's face.
I think depends where you put them.
I'm very nervous about it, but then again, when we did our little layout, we put a hotel down near the river.
Yeah.
And
A
so, like,
monster.
you know, like, it may make sense in some context.
Yeah.
At some point, there could be a building that does make sense. And so,
Well, that flexibility is what you're saying. and
That's what I-
That's why I'm saying that the area close to the tracks, to me, makes more sense than closer to the river. Somebody comes with a project that's fabulous, that's 5 stories, make it pencil. I think we should have that flexibility.
Where they have so much open space because they've densified and got 5
or they
stories.
step
Yeah,
in
they step in.
appropriately.
What if somebody
Yeah.
comes with a project that you don't define as fabulous, and it still pencils? Because when you have flexibility, that means
Well, it's
It-
still
it
gotta,
becomes down
it's
to
still gotta be a
opinions.
it's still gotta be a good project. We have a project right
But
now
Who's
that,
defining?
Yeah,
Who's
that's a
defining?
slippery
Defining.
slope.
So you're putting a
we
lot of
define
pressure on the.
it, we define
planning
it all the
commission.
time. The planning commission defines it all the time.
And a lot of things don't get built that maybe should have.
That's right, but,
That's why nothing's happened, is
but
because.
that's, you know, the artist law, well, you know, we, that's what planning commissions do, that's what we do as a communities.
So
Somebody brings us a project,
somewhere-
is it right or not?
When I know you want to move ahead.
No, that,
yeah.
yeah. Go ahead, Lisa. and then Travis.
See, somewhere in the action plan, what we have to talk about is how deeply we struggled with this. Joan's point that in 2005, there was a strategy that literally, has even one thing happened? The West River Street improvements have happened in the park. 2 things have happened in 20 years.
But
Right. 2
nothing
things have
private
happened
has
in 20
happened,
years,
too.
and
That's
so
the other point. It's
we
all
have a
been public
recommendation for a different approach that has risks.
But Lisa,
It
what's
also has
important
risks.
in what you're saying is there have been no private projects
Right.
in 20 years.
Yeah,
That's
it's been all
And
public
this
projects.
is really important.
Yeah.
Well, and the 2005 plan had no zoning attached to it, so we're talking about zoning here, which is a huge difference, right? You can make a strategy, but if the zoning code doesn't change, you've done nothing.
Yes, because nobody's going to invest if they don't know what is happening
Exactly.
next door.
That's right.
And we're right back down to that.
And Travis is gonna
Travis.
wrap us up.
Well, I was just gonna
Last
put this into perspective. 5-story building where my shop is right now, with me working below, 5 stories. What would that do to the view shed to the river from everybody that's over there right now? Would that be permitted? Would that be okay?
Probably at your place it would.
I mean, 5 stories is a lot.
I agree it is.
Why would
But
that be
how tall
okay?
are those, tanks next to you?
Probably not 5 stories.
But they're close. They're probably 40 feet.
I'm not
that's where
sure.
we come back to.
Yeah, the flyer
Like,
takes,
I mean-
just if you want.
It's a good
maps.
Just one
It
other
changes the
last
whole
thing,
view
I mean, there's
of
design
everyone on the other side of the
guidelines
street.
already in the code book,
Other-
why can't
other
there
side
just
of
be a
the traffic.
design recommended
Definitely.
guideline, like,
Yeah.
hey, closer to the river, smaller buildings, further away from the river, bigger buildings are allowed. We're not restricting from close to the river, but you gotta prove to us that this is gonna fit into the general design scheme of things or whatever. And there's like a lot of things, every subdivision in Truckee has their own specific guidelines, and they can be really complicated, and people are less likely to build there, or they can be lighter, and they're more likely to. So you just figure out the guideline part and let a lot of this stuff just kind of roll till someone wants to develop.
Yeah, I think there's some takeaways from today with context, the not prescriptive, and then
Yes.
compatibility too. So, some good thoughts for us to noodle on and think about how we work together. I'm gonna turn it back over to Joan.
With that, I'm gonna open for public comment.
Way to bring us home, Joan.
Yeah.
I'll give it a small shot here. You guys are trying to do something that's impossible. You can't give somebody a really sharp tool that does the job and it not be able to be abused. A really good chainsaw will cut somebody in half instead of just a tree. But you can't change the chainsaw to make it that this chainsaw cannot cut humans, which is what we want. We don't want it to ruin the entire vision of the country here. But we really need it to cut trees so that we can pull them out of the road and get through when they fall over. So if you're gonna give a really sharp tool, a good tool to do what we need to allow it, you are having the risk that it can cut somebody in half. And there's nothing that you can do. You cannot make a guard on the saw, because if you put a guard on the saw that can't cut the human, you can't cut the tree anymore. You can't do what you need it to do. So you guys should not be so worried that every time you talk, we'll do this and the opposite this, and we want single family, we don't want single family. These tools are contradictory, and you're gonna have to live with it and maybe have a little trust. But at the same time, planning department being the bottleneck and ruining everything because it's too much discretion is like, well, we decided that that one doesn't fit here and this one does fit here. And when the developer started with the strong tool that he saw that he could do this here, and then he discretionally gets thrown out. That's the big problem, and the planning department may always be the bottleneck again with huge constraints and long-term approvals or not approvals because there's too many things on the table that get, so I don't know if my comments is gonna make this worse, but if you make a strong tool, it can be abused, and you gotta just know that. And maybe you want to have some strong tools on the table so it does get built. If you put guards all over the tools, nothing's gonna get built. You can't cut the tree anyway. So you have this wonderful chainsaw, and it's all guarded up, and it's got all the rails and everything, and it's not gonna get you out of the tree that falls across the road anyway. So you guys gotta accept some of your frustration because you're making contrary choices. This is totally contrary to that, and you're making rules on both, and if you do it right in the middle, nobody's gonna do anything. You can't strike it right in the middle and cover all the rules. So I don't know how you find the way through this, but I'm a tool guy. I've used every tool, and I take off the guards the first thing, and I know it can cut my leg off now. But I can't use the tool with all the guards on and all the little safety factors and all the little, and you gotta pull it off, and you gotta be able to use the tool. And mostly you might get proper use, and you'll have very few things that get through and puts a big 5-story building right on the river. But you kinda have to have some risk here, but we don't wanna turn it into the planning debacle, that planning has so much power of this one's yes or no of every possible choice, because then it makes a mess for him. That this is just this disaster of the planning department being in the way. So,
Thank you.
sorry about the frustration, because it's here, and it's always gonna be here, and you probably ought to accept it and take a chance.
Great. Thank you very much. That. Committee member updates.
I don't have one.
Oh.
We have too many people at our lunch learn tomorrow, so I don't need to. We have a lunch learn tomorrow. AI, it's gonna be great. 50 people.
Nice.
Wow.
Good job.
What about Truckee
Great.
Connections?
Oh, that's a good one. Thank
Yeah.
you, Krisick. Community, we have our first Community Connection event of 2025, which that's crazy to say. We're going to Sugar Rush again for tubing, 4:30 to 6:30 on January 23rd. It's $20 for public, $10 if you're a member of the chamber. It's gonna be super fun. It's always a really, really fun one. So they keep it open for us late and it goes really fast and yeah, we'll probably sell out. So if you're interested, let me know.
Say the date again?
Thursday, the 23rd.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I just wanted to, I meant to send a note or an email at least to town staff for, I know there were other people involved, the town staff really led the effort to create the holiday gathering and, you know, for property owners as well. I know that the committees were involved in that too. And so I really appreciated that, and
Yeah.
the cards were awesome. That was a really great gift, and I gave a bunch of them away already, and proud of that. So thank you.
Yes, thanks, Dan.
Yeah.
Well, Happy New Year. You're welcome. And please remember to let us know if you're interested in the railroad crossing pedestrian second feasibility study process. which
By
we need-
Friday morning.
Yes, and Steph, we have you down, so you don't have to.
Okay,
let us
thanks.
know. Travis, you texted, are you interested? Okay, so we have 2 so far.
Enroll.
Enroll, 3. Okay, anybody besides Travis, Steph, or Rolf is interested? Please let me
Well,
know.
Lisa and I have been texting that somehow the Truckee River Legacy Foundation would love to be involved in that in some way, or at large, but I know Lisa volunteered because she.
I don't have a
is-
day
is-
job anymore.
So I second that, that nomination, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so if you could add my hat to the the list of names, if you add my name to the list of other names in the hat.
Okay, we will do that. Cool.
Great. With that, I will call for adjournment, unless there's any other, check. To the February 4th meeting of this body, right here. Great, thank you all so much. Great discussion tonight, thank you.